The last death knell in it is the Industrial Revolution. Not for just the reasons you think. It's not just for the child labor law, the child laborer. It stripped human beings of their dignity at the time. All of a sudden, the dignity that came from human labor was gone. All of a sudden, the home life was gone. The families had to move into cities, which was the ideal at the time because of the Industrial Revolution. So you had every part of the animal used. You had everyone work in the field, and it was all for the contribution directly back to the family. The scientific revolution took that away. You had mentioned in scripture and by endless philosophers throughout the ages that philosophy in truth is like the farm because it slowly progresses. You can't force it any quicker than it is meant to come. And then we have the scientific revolution that all of a sudden says, no, it can come that quick. And so you have, make sure I get along. There we go. Last note. All right. It replaces labor. It kills the slow progression of wisdom. Skills are rendered obsolete. And then you have my favorite guy, or rather not so much, John Dewey. All right. And if you know Dewey's name,
Dewey Decimal System.
The Dewey Decimal System, the way they organize books in a library. And spoiler alert here, he liked his human beings the way he liked his library. Organized and in one specific place.
James.
All right. And codified and numbered and quantified. John Dewey saw all of this was going on. He agreed everything that was going on was chaotic. He agreed that everything that we knew was gone. And that was cool, apparently. And he says, it is useless to bemoan the departure of the good old days of children's modesty, reverence, and implicit obedience. Keep in mind, everyone I've quoted so far is from their mouths.
Yeah.
All right? If we expect merely by bemoaning and by exhortation to bring them back, it is radical conditions which have changed, and only an equally radical change in education suffices. We must recognize our compensations, the increase in toleration and breadth of social judgment, the larger acquaintance with human nature, the sharpened alertness in reading signs of character and interpreting social situations, greater accuracy of adaptation in differing personalities, contact with greater commercial activities. These considerations mean much to the city-bred child of today. City-bred child. And if that's unclear, he goes on to make sure to specify in the rest of his text, there's not another child. It's the city-bred child. The child that grows up in the city is the new child. He agrees that all of those things are gone. But that's just the way it is now. And so to give Dewey credit on the other side of things, Dewey tried to only come up with a solution for that which he bemoaned. The unfortunate part is Dewey felt that the solution was now, instead of us each being our own human being with dignity, that each one of us would serve one job, one role in society, and that the point of education now was to not have the dignity of a human being full of choice and wonder and splendor, but to learn to be a plumber from 9 years old, to learn to be a teacher from 7 or 8. Not that one couldn't grow up in these things, such as in the Middle Ages, where we would have those traits across generations, but that you didn't receive an education to grow in wisdom and be
Many talents,
many talents have a core. It's to say, with the classical education we had, you could be a plumber, you could be a theologian or a priest, but at the table at night, you could all talk philosophy. You could all talk wisdom and virtue. Dewey said that's not the point anymore. The point of education is just to make you a good citizen of society. And to his credit, this had been happening for 100 years up to him. As we backtrack for a second, the United States started public school shortly after Germany did as well. But Germany's was with, and to quote, the indoctrination of their citizens to make them more socially obedient. And then 10 years later, a name which some people within education may recognize, Horace Mann, all right, who is considered to be the father of American education, adopted the German model. It's also, as a side note, where we get kindergarten from. So they believed that the younger we got them, the younger we could make them efficient, obedient citizens of society. Literally the German for a garden of children. All right? Just think about that for a second.
What we're doing, what's happening in our world today, even, is kind of...
So now you got the Germans, now you got the Americans. You have everybody on board with this notion of education is no longer about growing in wisdom and virtue with God and the true and the good and the beautiful, and it's all about salvation. It's now about making you a cog within the system. And some tried to fight back against this. They said, well, maybe Dewey's correct. We haven't pursued the good before. But the response was the ancients knew about the scientific method. You look at the Greeks and Moses, even the Egyptians, they knew about quantifying stuff and about producing needs. There are practical ends to everything you learn in a classical education, but it's first about your relationship with God, about salvation, and then you can figure out how to apply that to create the will or to create a hydraulic system. One can be applied to the other can't. A classical education can be applied to the practical, but the practical cannot be applied to classical education or to a love of wisdom of God. And so, like I said, the ancients knew this. It wasn't that they were ignorant of the scientific method or practical needs. They just saw that they did not want to sacrifice the soul to the cost of the body. And that's what the Industrial Revolution became going forward for education, was just teaching us how to meet the pleasures, the needs of our body, the physical ends on this earth, rather than to prepare for heaven. So then this is the last attempt. Anybody know what this is without looking? It's right there. I'm sure you all have this photo memorized. All right. That's the Third Baltimore Council. So we had Baltimore, which is, for the longest time was kind of the center of Catholic America, the Catholic U.S., get together and say, we've got to try to put a pin in this. So they got together. They started to establish more and more parochial schools. The bishops grew in number, tripled, quadrupled in number from the first to the second to the third Baltimore Council. And it's also, by the way, where we got the Baltimore Catechism and the third plenary council. So, something to truly be proud American-wise of is if you're reading the Baltimore Catechism, it's both Catholic and American identity. It's something you can truly be proud of that is in no way a watering down of the Council of Trent or the Roman Catechism. At this time, the numbers were so large, to give you a scale of how successful they were as of 1850, that by 1950, the numbers that we now have of schools currently open was double that as of 1950. So take every Catholic school in the nation, and it was doubled at the time. We've lost half since 1950 of the schools that Catholic schools we had in America. Why? Because we tried to keep up with the public schools. We tried to keep up with the other private schools. We had a method that worked for years and years and centuries and millennia. What did I say at the very beginning? Simple methods. All right, a handful of books, a focus on the spiritual. There's a reason why if you look at all the photos, you can see one nun teaching over 100 students. Not that I advocate that. We can answer that in a few minutes. I believe there's a middle ground between that. But they could. They could teach that because the methods were simple and they could walk from child to child. And to borrow a current term, they could differentially instruct these students. But then we tried to keep up with the public schools who had the new strategies, had the new formulas, had the new technology. And this is even back in the 50s we were experiencing this problem. This isn't now with the laptops. We tried to keep up with the strategies, the manpower, the faculty size of the public schools. But what's the problem between us and them on that one?
I don't think kids are learning it the right way.
Other than
they're getting taxpayer funding and we're not.
They get state funding. They get government funding. They can pour as much money as they want to into it and waste that money. And I've personally seen that money wasted.
Right.
And I mean, I use this term in company, but let's just say they waste money. All right. And so the Catholic schools on the other end wanted to try to use those methods, but couldn't, and they were running themselves dry, which is now why we're at where we're at. That's it. All right.
Well, it's too expensive. To go to one, I could never afford it with all my kids. So that's why I did turn those.
So that's the general presentation. I think questions after this?